One day, my mom had to have a meeting with some lady to design a website for her business. She was just meeting the lady over coffee, so she dropped me off at a Target that was in the same shopping mall as the coffee place. She assumed I didn't want to sit around while they talked about adult stuff. I'm a female, and at this time I was maybe 13 or 14, so my mom felt safe leaving me to entertain myself at Target for about an hour. She dropped me off out front, and I went inside to try and occupy myself. I wandered around the whole store and ended up getting a few snacks and a drink. I made my way to self-checkout. I was just about done checking out when I happened to turn around to notice a man. He wasn't doing anything much, and I didn't look at him for any reason. I guess my eyes just wandered over him for a second. He was checking out himself at a kiosk across from mine, and he only got one or two things, just like me. Now I can't remember exactly what this guy looked like, but he was older, maybe in his 50s or 60s. Brown, combed-over wisps of hair barely covered his clearly balding head, and he had these khaki shorts that were hiked way up, and his shirt was tucked into his shorts. I checked out only like 15 minutes into being there. I still had tons of time to kill. So I continued to wander around Target, looking at products, playing on my phone. Eventually I got to the very back of the store. Target must have been rearranging, because there was a group of maybe 5 to 7 empty shelves that didn't have a single product on them. I was getting bored of looking around, so I decided to go into one of these empty aisles. I was just taking pictures of myself, playing on my phone. I knew nobody would bug me because there was nothing to buy back there, and nobody did for a while. It was relatively quiet, so I was able to hear someone's footsteps in the next aisle. This didn't make too much sense because I went into one of the empty aisles in the middle. I knew that there was also nothing in the aisle where I heard the footsteps. At this point, I shrugged it off. I assumed they would go away promptly, but that's when they turned into my aisle. I recognized that it's the man from the checkout because of his khaki shorts. He didn't say a word to me. He was actually acting like he was looking on the shelves, which was super weird because there was nothing there. I didn't understand why he'd be there, so I just got my phone and left to the next aisle, still wanting to take pictures on my phone without a creepy guy watching me. That's when, almost immediately after I turned into the next aisle, he turned into the same one. Now I'm sure this dude is back here for me. There was no one but him and me in the back. There were no products. There would be no use for people to be back there. He still had his bag from self-checkout with him, which now I believe whatever he bought was an excuse to follow me out. Maybe he assumed I'd leave after I checked out. Anyways, I knew this guy was following me now, and I knew no one would even think of trying anything if there were other people around. So I started walking to the front, knowing that the farther to the front I got, the more people would see me. He continued to walk after me, still not saying a word. I started getting concerned now, so I started speed walking. So did he. This time though, as I'm making my way to the front, I'm about 1/4 of the way, he starts gaining on me. He starts getting closer. I just start walking faster, absolutely certain that this man wants to grab a hold of me or something. As I get faster, he does as well. It gets to the point where I am running through this Target, this man still right behind me, literally running after me. I turned the corner of a shelf and looked behind me, wondering if this guy really had the guts to chase me at full speed in such a public area, and he had. I'll never forget the image of his angry, fatigued face as he chased after me. All Targets are relatively set up the same, so when I say that I finally got to the women's section, you should know that the section is usually near the front of the store. I dashed through the fitting room area, where an attendant was behind the counter. After seeing her, I felt so relieved. I looked behind me and he was nowhere to be seen now. I was confused, but I still went all the way to the front where all the cashiers are. I got to the Starbucks cafe that some Targets have in them, just so I could take a seat and be around people. My whole body was shaking. I couldn't even speak. I couldn't believe that someone would actually attempt to do this in such a public place like a grocery store. It really perplexed me. After a few minutes of sitting there and texting my friends about what happened, I see this man, with his khaki shorts and his Target bag with one thing in it, walking out of the exit. I stared at him with these wide eyes as he walked out, hoping he'd see me and know that he couldn't get away with whatever he was trying to get away with. But he didn't even look at me. He stared straight ahead. I watched him walk through the parking lot to an old crappy car parked near the front. I watched him drive away. I was too afraid and shaken up to even stand again, so I stayed in the cafe and played on my phone until my mom picked me up. To this day, I still don't understand how this would even happen. Don't ever think people don't have the audacity. It could set you up for a very random and scary encounter. It was around July of 2022. I don't remember the exact day, but that day I was hanging out with my best friend Kay and their little cousin T. T mentioned something about wanting to go somewhere and I didn't mind, so I offered to drive us to the next city over. We live in a small town, so that means driving out of town to do anything remotely interesting. We randomly decided to take a look at the dollar store and another bargain store called Big Lots, just to wander around and talk about random things. T was 17 at the time, so Kay and I got to hear about all of her teenage drama she has with boys. Kay and I are both 21. We bought some random things before deciding to leave. It was around 8 p.m. As we were walking down the sidewalk where the other businesses on the small strip were, a slightly heavier man with a blue and red hoodie was walking toward us with his head down and hands in his pockets. Naturally, we both went to the other side of the sidewalk to avoid him as he already creeped us out just by how he was walking. Then he said something I still, to this day, don't understand. Fancy, 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 at the three of us. I didn't hear it clearly, but T did, which made her start laughing. She couldn't seem to stop. I had no clue why the man would ever call us that because we weren't wearing anything remotely fancy, literally hoodies and jeans. Kay then said, "Don't look back," as we kept walking, but it was too late as T already looked back, and I'm glad she did because she saw that the guy was following us. We began to walk faster out of fear, and I had the quick thinking of ducking into the Target store that was just 10 feet away and hide in there. We ducked behind the corner toward the bathrooms and away from the door so he couldn't see us. However, the only way to tell if he was still there was to come completely out of hiding. T saw him just standing there, almost as if he was waiting for us, which made us cringe. That's when he turned around and saw us, coming into the store. T began her nervous laughter again, and Kay was mostly quiet, just following me. That's when I decided that we should go to the very back of the store and not walk in a straight line but zigzag through random aisles to confuse him. It worked, and we seemed to have lost him. I knew we needed to find an employee, but just our luck, there were no employees in sight. That's when I had the idea we should blend in with someone's group. As awkward as it would be to ask some random shoppers if we could walk with them, it had to be done. We found a woman and around 6 boys ranging from ages 10 to 16. I assumed they were a family or a mother with her sons and their friends. We told them the situation and apologized for interrupting their shopping, but she was willing to help us find Target security. According to Kay, the oldest boy seemed to have gotten a serious look on his face. We nearly jumped out of our skin when we saw the man again as we walked with the family toward the front, and quickly pointed out that was the man that followed us in. He actually spotted and didn't care that we were with a group as he made his way toward us. We found an employee, explained the situation, who then called a manager. As we were talking to the employees who also brought security, the man was loitering around. Kay even recalled making eye contact with him, which I purposely avoided doing. Some male employees along with a male security guard volunteered to escort us and the nice family that we grouped up with to the parking lot. As we were being escorted out, the man then tried to follow the family but was stopped by a brave employee. He then went back onto the sidewalk before he stopped us. I kid you not, my car was parked 500 feet away from the store, yet the creep was able to get to my car in less than 30 seconds despite the security guard being there. Kay and I wasted no time getting in the car. I did panic a little when Kay was taking a little too long to shut their door, but other than that, we were safe. We saw the security guard talking down to the creep, and since my windows were rolled up, we sadly heard none of the conversation. But the creep looked angry. We drove off, shaken. I remember Kay telling me, "I put you guys ahead of me because there's no way I would let something happen to my best friend and little cousin," which I chewed them out for, telling them not to throw their life away like that in a situation. Kay already has some past trauma involving men, so no way in hell would I let them make that sacrifice. I told them that if that ever happened again, we would all make it out together. No one is sacrificing themselves to save the others. Let this be a lesson to always remain calm and ask for help, even if you feel awkward asking a total stranger. Needless to say, I'm never telling my parents about this as they're paranoid as it is, and I'm never going back to that Target after 8 again. I used to work at Target in Melbourne back in 2003 when I was 18. I am not what you would call an average female. I am 6 feet 2, have lots of tattoos, and am not hard to miss if you were to come to the checkout. A quick layout of the store. It was 3 levels, including a basement level where the DVDs were, and where I used to work a few shifts. The majority of the time, though, I would spend working at the checkouts. One shift, an older man with gray hair and glasses came to the checkouts. The first thing I noticed is he didn't have any products to buy. He said, "Wow, you remind me so much of my granddaughter." Harmless, right? I smiled and joked about how she must be a great girl. He then began to ask me about my family and where I grew up, etc. Being from Adelaide, I knew I probably didn't know this man. It was weird, but not unsettling. Thankfully, there were customers behind him, and I politely said I needed to get back to work. He smiled and said he might bring in some photos one day to show me. I smiled, and he left. I didn't think about the encounter at all after that until 2 weeks later, he was back. I wasn't worried, but just annoyed, being 18 and not interested. He showed me photos of his granddaughter and family, and there was a slight resemblance. Again, being a busy store, I had a lot of work to do and excused myself to get back to work. He stood in the store staring at me for a long while, which I noticed, and this was making me uncomfortable. My biggest mistake was not letting my supervisor know at the time. I didn't really tell anyone except for a friend who asked who he was. Skip to 3 weeks later, and yep, you guessed it. There he was. But this time he looked sad. He managed to get me aside as I was walking to my break. The photos he showed me were of a funeral. First of all, who the heck takes photos of a funeral? Anyway, he said that his daughter and granddaughter were murdered by his son-in-law, and he missed them very much. I kind of felt sorry for him, but then he said something that sent shivers up my spine. "I know that you're my granddaughter. I'm so happy to have found you again." What the actual heck? My face went red as it does when I get nervous. "I don't think so, sir. I have missed you so much." He began to cry and grabbed my arm. He tried to hug me, but luckily one of my tall managers walked by and I pulled away. "Hey, Grant, do you still need help with that cage?" Grant looked confused, but he must have seen my unease because he nodded. "Yeah, that'd be good." I looked back at the crying gray old man and smiled nervously. We got in the elevator and I escaped upstairs. I then told my manager what was happening, and they noticed how much this freaked me out. Thankfully, I didn't see this man for a few weeks. Having a week's holiday helped. A friend did say she saw him around and he was looking for me. I came back to work, and not a week later, I came to the front registers to start my shift, and I saw him. Luckily, he didn't see me. I stopped and headed back to the elevators. I found my manager and told him what was going on. He told me to go downstairs to the basement and stay there until he came and got me. I don't know what happened except what I was told. Apparently the man started yelling and saying that his granddaughter worked here and started yelling that he needs to see me. The security and my manager tried for about 10 minutes to get him out of the store. He had with him photos, female clothing, and a bracelet. I can only assume they were from his granddaughter. He started screaming his granddaughter's name and had to be dragged out of the store. From that day on, I spent most of my time in the basement, working the registers there. I left that job to move back to Adelaide soon after. I did kind of feel sorry for the man, having suffered such a loss. He was obviously not accepting their deaths.